Hello again, and a very warm welcome to the second BetConnect podcast. I'm Oliver Brett, and once again delighted to be joined by Rory Delargy of the Irish Daily Star and the Irish Field. Hi, Rory.
Hi, Ollie.
And alongside Rory here in our very cosy studio in the West End is Maddy Playle of the Racing Post.
Morning, Ollie.
And welcome to both of you. Right, well, we've had a very busy Christmas in racing. I gather neither of you two had enough time to actually get to the races. I had a good day at Newbury for Cheltenham Hurdle Day. Maddy, you're going to Cheltenham on Trials Day.
I am, yeah. I haven't been racing a lot over the Christmas period, but I have managed to book a rare sort of Saturday off, so I'm looking forward to going to Trials Day. I think potentially this year it could be perhaps a little bit better card than it has been in previous years. So fingers crossed, yeah.
I think statistically it delivers the highest percentage of festival winners, the Trials Day, compared to even the November or the December days. So it's it's definitely one to look for
exactly.
pointers, yeah.
I think this year as well we've got the likes of Santini, De Rasha Counter, the big breakaways, a horse that a lot of people are excited about. They're all on course to run. So and there's also the sale afterwards. So if you're into bloodstock at all, I always like to pop along to that and see horses sell for an awful lot of money.
Never been to a national hunt sale. Have you, Rory?
Yeah, as Manny says, it's always fun to put your head in there for 5 or 10 minutes and see what's going for big money, and it always is big money these days. I've been to, I bought a horse at Ascot sales once, many moons ago, but a potential broodmare, and there, you're often seeing horses led out, sold for 800 quid or that kind of thing. Ascot used to be right at the bottom end of the spectrum, but those tat sales at Cheltenham now are absolutely huge, and it's a surprise to see anything not go for six figures.
Well, what happened to your potential broodmare?
She's no longer with us, I'm afraid, but she was a smashing mare, out of a Rasher mare actually. So I'd be keen to see the Rasher counter continue to do well, just for the family.
I saw Maria's Benefit. She was one of the horses that I saw sell, and it's good because you can get into the stables and actually get up close to the horses as well and speak to the lads who are looking after them. So it's good insight.
Is it very different to the atmosphere at Tattersalls, which is the only real auction place I've been to for horse
I
race?
would say so. Tattersalls, obviously, a lot of flat horses go through there. I've been to a couple of times to Tattersalls, but yeah, it's a completely different atmosphere, I'd say.
Good. Well, we're going to begin with a story that's kind of dominated many column inches in probably both your papers. Altior, a story that may have left the UK's most experienced national hunt trainer, Nicky Henderson, with a slightly tarnished reputation. Rory, I'm going to let you sort of pick the bones, and if there's any meat left on those bones to sort of discuss, I don't know.
Yeah, well, this is the thing about the Altior gate, as it must be named. It's a little bit stale now. It was last week's news, and we move on very quickly. But the most important aspect of this moving forward is that there's now going to be a change in the way Nicky Henderson reports breaking news. Breaking news should be reported through a news channel, essentially, and so for him to go to the PA now, and obviously you go through the usual channels with the BHA and Weatherby's, but to actually let that news come out through the PA and then filter down through all the other news outlets is the way it should be done. It's the way it's been done in other scenarios where trainers have got sponsorship deals with or ambassadorial deals with bookmakers, and it's an important aspect of things because it helps the perception of that relationship. It's there's nothing strictly wrong in what Nicky Henderson did in the first place, but it ends up creating a bit of a mess. Nicky tried to keep everyone updated, and if you speak to Nicky on the course, he will try to dot every I and cross every T, and then the idea that he's trying to lead anyone astray is wide of the mark. But because of the way Nicky operates, things change on a daily basis, sometimes an hourly basis, and the idea of you getting published news which can be contradictory, especially if that's ghosted as well, because you miss a bit of nuance there. If you hear a trainer interviewed, live on a broadcast, then you can read between the lines, you can hear what they're saying, and you can make your own judgment of what you think, how you think things are. If someone else writes that down and changes the wording a little bit to make it look better, then you can get a false impression. And because perception is so important, it's important to have a big distinction between promotional stuff that gets people interested in racing, videos, interviews with the trainer, updates on horses' targets going forward. If you're looking at the Cheltenham Festival and you're saying, I might have a team of 30 and here they are and I'll parade them and talk about them. That's terrific. People thrive on information, but stuff that's going to affect betting markets and stuff that's going to affect racing integrity, that has to be done separately.
And if a trainer does alert the Press Association with sensitive news like this, does the Press Association have power to get markets suspended on anti-post?
No, the PA wouldn't, but it's not like Nicky wouldn't simply go to the PA. He would also go to Weatherby's if necessary. He would go to the BHA. So if you're looking to suspend markets, essentially the firms who are betting on races would get that information. They would get a direct feed of that information, and it's then for them to suspend markets if the information suggests that's the right thing to do. Obviously, if the information is very reliable, then you don't necessarily have to do an awful lot of that. Markets tend to be suspended when we're in a state of flux. We don't know what's happening. Right. And where you've got definite news, then you can just take horses out of the betting. Or if you've got a scenario where, and indeed a lot of times, in the case of Altior, it's been you're quite likely to get what appears to be definitive information, but actually it's up in the air. When a horse is, Nicky said during the week, he just didn't look quite right. But these things can change on a daily basis. And the horse comes out the next morning, bucking and squealing, as they say, then you will change your mind.
I think the thing is as well, isn't it, with this, was the market move. Now, I'm not saying, it took a great deal, but you look at cases like Enable before she won her arc. John Gosling came out afterwards and said that she'd had an awful preparation. They weren't even sure if she was going to run in the race, but the market never moved.
No.
Whereas in this case, they did. Now, Nicky Henderson, he spoke to the Racing Post and he said, what can I do? And I don't know. I think that's a very key sort of element to this story, in that whoever these people are, they clearly need to be sort of weeded out and made sure that it doesn't happen, because as we'll talk even more about perception, but that's key, isn't it? Rory, interested, do you think that yards should be sponsored by bookmakers?
I think in the current day and age, in an ideal world, you wouldn't need it. In an ideal world, we would have all this information, and trainers could produce this kind of content on their own, or they would have people in the yards doing a lot of social media stuff, and you wouldn't need to have someone else. But the bottom line is, there isn't the money to do that for most people in racing, and it's a massive help to a lot of people, young trainers who are.
But it's not necessarily the lower trainers that are getting the media sort of deals.
No, but
it needs to be a pretty big yard already.
There's some more of that happening. In Ireland, particularly, you get a few up and coming yards who are the subject of this kind of deal. Whereas, the ones we've seen here tend to be the biggest trainers in the first place. And this is a tricky one, because if you think the most important thing is information about horses running, then if you deal with a yard with 20 horses, you end up with an awful lot of blank space there, because you don't have horses running all the time. So you need to be dealing with the big stables to have the content. But I don't have a massive problem with it. I do have a problem with not understanding the difference between news and promotional material. But I don't have a huge problem with bookmakers having deals with trainers, as long as that sets in place scenarios in which trainers are told how to behave in certain circumstances. It can actually make the whole thing better. Because this would have been, 10 years ago, this would have been absolute carnage anyway.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I agree with you. I think the key there is in an ideal world, and we're not in that ideal world. I've gone to racing in various places abroad. Hong Kong, for instance, spent a lot of time there. They would never dream of having anything like a bookmaker sponsoring a stable on the table. But realistically, that's not the climate we're operating in here, is it?
No, and of course, the thing about Hong Kong, of course, is that they're cash rich because of tote betting. And therefore, and it's hugely important to them for racing to be seen as 100% straight. If there's anything vaguely, if you see a slightly suspect ride in Hong Kong, you're probably looking at someone getting a 6-month ban. Whereas a lot of this, racing here historically has always been a little bit, There's been a degree, I don't want to say skullduggery is the wrong word, but there's been a degree of intrigue.
Yeah.
And we end up being happy as long as it's 95% straight and we ignore the little bits and pieces around the periphery, unless it looks like it's going to hit the headlines, and then we've got to come down hard on it. In Hong Kong, everything has to be absolutely straight because that's where the turnover comes from, that's where the profit comes from, and that's what's churned back into racing. And they've managed to make that huge business by making it possible for punters to make decent money because, again, small takeouts from the tote in Hong Kong as well, huge pools, huge exotic pools, and everyone knows that you can analyse a race without having to work out are any of these trying?
Yeah.
And that's a ridiculous question to have to ask yourself of any race. And again, the part of the issue we have here is that we have races that are naturally uncompetitive. You have novice hurdles with a 1-4 favourite, and everyone's terrified that the handicapper is going to murder them for finishing close to a favourite. So no one's thinking about cheating. They just, they're just thinking further down the line about how I can win any kind of race with this horse. Whereas if you've got a competitive racing product, and horses can be placed to win races, then everyone is trying all the time and the thing works brilliantly. But there's no point in us thinking, let's do it like Hong Kong, because
that's what I mean.
we're working
totally
from an entirely
different
different scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you remember, sort of 3 or 4 years ago, there was a period when the BHA was desperately struggling to get levy payments out of any bookmakers at all. And I very much get the feeling now that it's a sort of softly approach between the BHA and bookmakers like Unibet, which is why the BHA haven't said anything derogatory about Unibet and the Nicky Henderson scenario. They know it's a mutually beneficial arrangement between Seven Barrows and Unibet. They're both getting what they want. They just need to be very careful with
the punter
And they
has
don't
to
license-
come first, doesn't it?
Yeah,
The
and they don't
punter has
license
to come
Unibet
first.
either, so there's nothing to be gained by them saying anything derogatory about Unibet. They've got to deal with the individuals they license in the first place, and that's obviously going to be the crux of what they do. And it's slightly ironic that Nicky's got himself a bit hot under the collar about how the BHA have dealt with this.
Yeah, but as Maddy says, I mean, the punters ultimately don't need to be taken for fools over this. And the great irony, of course, is that the gamble on Top Notch last week went hideously astray, even though at one point Daryl Jacob was looking over his shoulder at the threats to come, ended up finishing third on his horse when Frodon went streaking clear and was challenged most closely by Keeper Hill, wasn't it?
I think with any incident of this nature, it's key to focus on what we're going to learn from it going forward and how we're going to avoid similar things happening again. Nicky Henderson said that he's no longer going to be releasing this information through Unibet. That's a big positive. That's how it should be done. And I think, just be careful with these sort of situations in future. If he's spoken to the people in his yard about keeping stum with this, market sensitive information, then that's, I suppose, all he can do for now.
Yeah, it won't make any difference, obviously.
Yeah.
If Nicky hasn't worked out that his yard's full of punters by now, then
well, that's the thing, isn't it? Historically, his yard has been known for it.
They might not even be full of punters. There might just be 1 or 2 people who have a drink in the pub with somebody else who talks to someone else, and then
Yeah, but the thing, without casting stones here, historically, there are Paul Nicholls has had an 11-year deal now. With Betfair, and there's been pretty much nothing. There's no strange market moves there. Whereas the market tends to tell you what the story is at Seven Barrows before the official news breaks, whatever that might be. In fairness, a lot of that is, Nicky wants to wait to speak to his owners, and none of them have mobile phones because they're all, stuck in the last century.
Shall we move on to something else now?
Indeed.
ITV Racing have not yet secured a terrestrial deal to broadcast racing from next calendar year. Is this a worry? I mean, they're still 10 months or 11 and a half months, aren't they, until next year starts. They'll get something in place, won't they, Maddy? Or is there any other broadcaster out there who's trying to do a deal?
I don't know, to be honest. But what I would say is, you'd like to think with how successful the viewing figures have proved ITV to be, again, with them sort of crossing with other channels, presenting racing to a wider audience, the figures have proved that it's been awfully successful. And I think, if we want racing to keep prospering, it would be in its interest to continue with ITV and get a good deal out of it. So obviously it's a pretty considerable concern. one of the things that's a stumbling block with this new deal is monetized social media content. And obviously we'll get on to more to do with this in a little bit, but it's a big grey area in racing, and hopefully they'll be able to negotiate some sort of deal around it. But in this sort of new age of technology and social media, I guess we just have to bear that in mind and be alive to it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly haven't read any stories of the BBC suddenly coming back in for racing.
No.
Channel 4...
That's a million.
Although somebody would have to show the Grand National and the Derby in the event of no deal at all, because they're two of the sporting events that have to be shown on terrestrial TV alongside the FA Cup and England.
How familiar are most of the general public with that? That you have these crown jewels that have to be on.
When I worked years ago, when I worked for the BBC, we used to do lots of stories about the crown jewels. Probably because they're the only things the BBC still showed, but. I don't know if it's a big thing. I mean, you often see deals get done in certain other sports. When the Cricket World Cup final was on, we suddenly saw that on terrestrial for the first time in a decade, which was very exciting last summer. But it would be a massive blow to racing if they couldn't get a proper.
I think they're still trying to get a 3-year deal by the end of this month. I think that's what's currently going on at the minute.
I mean, in fairness, it's not something I follow particularly closely, but the vibes I've picked up haven't been that this is in jeopardy.
Yeah, I mean,
just that there's this whole aspect of streaming content on whatever happens to be on Twitter or other social media outlets, where the racecourses want to be able to promote themselves through that kind of footage. So that just needs to be hammered out. What exactly is that worth, and how do you include it in a deal? So it just seems to be, as they say in the trade, getting all the ducks in a row.
Well, I mean, I've done, I've worked for all sorts of these people in a digital capacity. Certainly, Channel 4 when they had the exclusive deal from 2013 for 4 years. I looked after the website, and we did some the first couple of years of that, social media was just doing photographs of horses in a paddock, and then suddenly you could start having these clips of race finishes that you could put out online, and Twitter numbers grew exponentially, and it's a huge deal. And now, a typical racing TV digital shift is very, very busy, because you're doing
it's constant, isn't it?
You're doing specific content for the race courses, and you've got Horse Racing Ireland want a few exclusive interviews on their channels, and you've got these platforms like Grabio and Snappy TV where you can ping out these little clips all over the place. It's quite fun to do in a way, but it gets a bit tiring after a few 6 or 7 shifts of that in a row. But this is going forward, remains very valuable content, and it also the waters get further muddied by fans at race courses with their mobile phones.
Yeah, this is something that I've found really interesting at the minute. I'm not sure if it's because I've sort of come into racing as a fan from my perspective, and I've been at a racecourse with my phone and took pictures of horses or what have you, but we had people like the infamous racing blogger come along and start sharing content, and
he has a real name, Stephen Power.
Stephen Power, yes. But there's going to be a real issue, because RMG will say, well, if that's for commercial use, then of course they have a right to restrict it, to ban it, what have you. But if it's not, then they can't confiscate people's phones. They can't block content that is in theory just done from an enthusiast point of view. So I think really we need to get to a point where there's some more solid boundaries on what is and isn't allowed. And
I mean, is Stephen making money? That's what we don't really know. We don't know.
Well,
who,
I mean,
if
there's
anyone's
more than
paying
just him involved here. I mean, no doubt he is probably getting some monetary gain through it somewhere. I'm not sure. I don't know his particular
it's
case.
Kind of a bit hidden, isn't it? It's quite cryptic as to
exactly.
I mean, he's not funding himself to travel to.
He was sponsored by a bookmaker at one point, wasn't he? I think BetConnect sponsored him. But it's not just that. I mean, even with ownership, we look at ownership, and there was the Foxtrot Racing case at Cheltenham before Christmas. They took a video in the parade ring, and that was taken down, and they were sort of reprimanded over it. And owners are probably going to be thinking that they have rights to, video their own horse on race day and what have you. So I just think it's a very interesting, a very complex situation going forward. And again, interesting that ARC seem to have a much more relaxed stance on it than RMG.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think, generally speaking, ARC do have a more relaxed stance. Although, I mean, I remember individual cases, for example, being at Lingfield on all-weather finals day once and taking a short video of a horse that had won a race, just going around in circles in the winners' enclosure, and they didn't like that. So it's, sometimes little things, spanners get thrown in the works that you don't expect. There are so many grey areas in this, and
how on earth do you police it?
And it's so hard to police. I mean, and you compare that to other sports. So something like Wimbledon, they don't have any problem with a fan taking a little video of Roger Federer hitting a winner from their seat in the stands. They've never had an issue with that because it's such poor quality. It doesn't have any value on it. Everyone's doing something very similar.
But another layer to it now as well is there's been a young man on social media recently sort of interviewing trainers and jockeys on course. They've consented to it. And I mean, is that
which
allowed?
You wouldn't get at Wimbledon.
No.
There's no way you're going to go to a top tennis player.
Well, imagine going to a football match and trying to interview a player. It wouldn't work.
That's the unique aspect of racing, really, isn't it? That you're actually mixing with the competitors.
The access we get is unlike any other sport, isn't it? In a lot of ways.
So that's the aspect that has to be looked at. I mean, if Bryony Frost wants to give that young lad 20 seconds, great for him, not bad for her. Really. She's happy to do it, but then the authorities are stuck here thinking, hang on.
Well, yeah,
there's an overlap.
The interesting thing here is owners can be wrapped on their knuckles about it, but of course no one wants to speak to an owner as a rule, do they? Unless you're looking at major owners tend to get brushed over. If you're looking at a big race winner, people think jockey, they think trainer.
Sometimes the grooms as well are quite interesting content.
Yeah.
Them,
But of course, it's the only way of policing that is I guess through the ROA. You can't.
Well, they released their guidelines on Sunday
yeah.
evening, didn't they? And one of the questions was whether an owner can interview a trainer or jockey after the race, and now that. Depends on what you constitute as an interview. Is a debrief and asking a couple of questions an interview, or is that just your right as an owner to understand what happened during a race? I mean, it's
an
very
interesting use of the word interview, really, isn't it? Because it kind of suggests that it's a non-race specific question, in which case you're doing something that the paid media are there to do in the first place. But if you're speaking to the trainer about what's happened in the race and where your horse will run next, and you happen to film that, it seems bizarre that falls in the same category.
Precisely, that's exactly where I'm coming from.
Should we talk about some horses now? The Clarence House Chase coming up on Saturday. It looks like we've had a few sort of good duels actually this season. We had Surname Altior, and actually we had Undersow and Defi Dussault in the Tingle Creek. Now they take each other on in the Clarence House Chase. So right-handed again, 2 miles again, but flatter track. And Undersow has won this race twice before, but he is 12 years old now.
I think he's won it 3 times, hasn't
he?
Yeah, 16, 17, 18, I believe.
He won it at Cheltenham once, didn't he?
Yeah.
So, was it moved to Cheltenham?
It was moved to Cheltenham one year,
Gotcha. So, I mean, Undersow, great warrior. I think he's been leading the string out on Willie Mullins' gallops for 6 years now. He's 12 now, and he was doing it when he first got into the yard. He always likes to be in front of he doesn't like to see horses around him or in front of him. So that's his style. It's whether he has enough pace at the end of the race, isn't it?
Exactly. From my perspective, I'm just looking forward to it as a fan more than anything else. It has the potential to be a really sort of mouth-watering duel. If you're looking at it from a punting perspective, you'd probably want to be siding with Undersow, wouldn't you, at a bigger price? I mean, I had a look at this race earlier and I sort of thought maybe there's potential for him to get closer to Defi Dussault this time around. Defi ran at Ascot in the Coral Hurdle a couple of years ago. Admittedly, he wasn't right during that period, but he wasn't too good there. And I think if perhaps Paul Townend had his time again in the Tingle Creek, maybe he'd have gone a little bit faster or pushed the button a little bit earlier, because Undersow is a Ryanair winner. He does stay 2 miles on soft ground very, very well. And I think Ascot will allow him to potentially get into a better rhythm than
It
at
is,
Sandown.
it is slightly further as well. Sandown is actually short of 2 miles,
Mm.
and this is an extended 2 miles.
Yeah, okay.
So 2 miles, 160
So that
yards.
plays to his strengths, you think?
Well,
Yeah,
if you're talking about a horse with more stamina, then the further you're going, the happier you are in that regard.
It's a really interesting race tactically, isn't it? Because you know what both of them are going to do. Underso is enthusiastic. He's going to go out and maybe not lead, but he's going to be very positive and give it his all. Defi Desoy, he's quite an interesting horse to watch because he has to be delivered right at the perfect moment.
Yeah, the question on how you weigh this up is how you view the finish of the Tingle Creek.
Yeah.
Defi Desoy got there fairly easily and looked like he was going to win comfortably. Undersaw was really rattling back at him in the final 50 yards and was in front shortly after they pulled up. And the question is whether you think that the winner was simply idling in front because he got there a bit too easily, or whether he was all out and Undersaw's stamina was kicking in and another day, a few yards might have made the difference. For me, it's just a pity that Undersaw didn't get a great jump at the last fence. He wasn't bad. He just got in a little bit tight, whereas he'd been winging his fences up to that. If he'd winged the last again, then I think it probably would have helped the winner a little bit in that he would have had a target to aim at for longer in the race, but also would have given Undersaw a better chance of really getting involved in a battle. So it would have given us more definitive answers. But that's why this is a great race in prospect. It's essentially a match on paper. Janika's got half a chance if they underperform, but the idea of that head-to-head again on the slightly different circumstances makes it a fascinating race. Also, you got tactical issues as well because Ornua led them early at Sandown, which you can argue maybe didn't suit under. So I don't think he's bothered by that these days.
No.
He's been around for so long that he doesn't. In the old days he wouldn't have wanted to be taken on for the lead, but he's absolutely fine with that these days. The other aspect is the ground. It's probably going to be heavy, isn't it?
There's plenty of rain forecast between now and then, so it'll be a slog.
And Defi Desoy, he handles soft ground and he handles heavy, but I don't think he relishes it, whereas Undersaw really does, and that could be the difference between them on the day.
Yeah, I mean, I love both of these horses, but Undersaw, isn't he he's so underrated, isn't he? Fantastic little horse. He's so consistent. I was looking back through his racing post ratings the other day.
Hardly ever finishes outside the front.
Yeah, I think he's ran to 170 for the best part of 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, and that's I talked about this a couple of years ago, talking about what constitutes greatness in a racehorse, and it's not. We look at horses who've produced one or two huge performances that make them the best around. And maybe we're in that kind of scenario with the jumps ratings at the moment. But horses who hit within 2 or 3 pounds of those really high ratings and do it 10 or 12 times, those are the ones that you should really remember. Hurricane Fly as a hurdler, he was hardly ever more than a pound or two below his best form. He just kept running to that level all the time, and you could tell, you watch his races, he gave his all in doing that as well, and that's what you look for if you're a racing fan. You look for that in the horses that you follow, and Undersaw is very much in the same mould. He seems to give everything, and yet he's able to run to his form every time he turns up.
Well, he's 12 years old now, so dare I say it may be his last season at the very top, but he's certainly giving us plenty to admire. So what else have we got this weekend? We've got Ascot's got a 2.5 mile handicap hurdle, which obviously at this stage we don't know the final field exactly, but it was interesting to see De Bestie Man entered 7 days after his late unseat when still leading Burrows Edge. He probably won't take up that entry. The one I like, and I hope he does take his chances, Thomas Darby, who has plenty of weight and has proved disappointing over fences. So obviously coming back over hurdles, there's some excellent form in the book. I think was he second in last year's Supreme?
Yeah,
he was. Yeah, that's right. So I would, I'd look forward to seeing him, and I'd say he's got a half a chance of winning it.
Yeah, I mean, on that, Ollie Murphy's had 8 winners from his last 19 runners, that's 42% as a strike rate. You don't get much better than that. As you say, yet to have the final declarations. I thought it was interesting that Pic D'Or, he was in there. He leads the market. Obviously a strong fancy for the Lanzarote before he was ruled out. I think if I was pushed to pick one at this stage, I'd go for Bold Plan. I really like the way this horse won at Haydock. There was a lot more up his sleeve, and he's duly been put up £10, so that's a pretty big hike. But the fourth has come out and boosted the form since Honest Vic, and I quite like this approach Evan Williams has as sort of bringing these horses along and not necessarily aiming them at Cheltenham and sort of picking up big prizes along the way. So yeah, I think Bold Plan is really interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if there's still mileage in his mark of 140.
And the race before that, we have...
I was just going to... Sorry. Before you move on from that, I was just going to say that if the best demand does turn out, of course, he was the last flight faller. He's gone up £6 for that. Getting back to that...
Do you think he would have won that Lanzarote?
Yeah, he would have, yeah.
Do you think? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. The question with would he have won? Well, are you saying would he have won had he pinged the last hurdle, or are we suggesting that he made a mistake but his jockey didn't fall off? Because those are very different things. You know, it's once you start deciding, you know, if a fall didn't happen, how are you reconstructing that scenario then? So, you know, if he meets it wrong but survives the mistake, then he's going to lose momentum and probably gets picked up by the winner. But he did everything right, and he looked all over the winner 50 yards from the final flight just to get it wrong. And
I must admit, I backed him, so
yeah.
bit of a nightmare.
So he deserves the compensation, but of course he'd be going up in the weights, and I think he's out of the handicap as well, as it stands. But obviously, you know, we can lose a few of those at the top.
Yeah, so unlikely we think. Probably. The race before that, as I was going to say, Magic of Light has an entry, which is a mare I love. I mean, it produced an astonishing performance to come second behind Tiger Roll in the Grand National last year. There's some other nice horses in this mare's hurdle, aren't there, Maddy?
Yeah, exactly. Papagana, obviously third in the long walk when she was last seen behind the World's End. Magic of Light, she won over fences on her last start at Newbury. I must admit, I'm with you. I'm a big Magic of Light fan, but I did think that was a little bit... it got a bit hairy towards the end, didn't it?
It was pretty hairy in the Grand National. She made two absolutely appalling mistakes. That, you know, again, if you're talking about the race not being what it was, you don't have to go back too many years to have her in massive trouble with the errors she made. But she galloped all the way to the line. She didn't look like she really wanted to jump a fence at Newbury, I didn't think. She warmed up as the race went on, but, you know, she didn't need to lose her rivals. Two of them unseated, and the other one broke a blood vessel. So
this could be a good race as well. I mean,
she won this last year, and then she went on and won the listed chase at Huntingdon shortly afterwards. She turned out very quickly to do that. So she's as tough as they come. Obviously, Yard's in very good form as well.
Are there no suitable races for her in Ireland? She keeps coming over. She just seems to do most of her racing here.
I think it's a funny thing, isn't it? When trainers get into the habit of running in these certain sets of races, they tend to return. And, you know, as Rory said, she won it last year, so makes a lot of sense. Sensillano and Midnight Tune. I think Midnight Tune's got another option. Not sure Sensillano probably has as well, but they're both pretty good mares in their own right as well. So if the top four all turn up, this could be a proper contest.
Yeah,
we might see Tom Queally riding in it.
Frankel's jockey Tom Queally
had
Western
a winner Victory trained by Declan Queally. He rode at his home track, I suppose, over the Christmas period.
Well, he had a winner, didn't he?
Yeah. He rode a bumper winner.
Yeah.
Or was it over hurdles?
I think it was over hurdles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, was it just sort of picking up your point about Magic of Light making errors but still finishing the race in the Grand National? I mean, that's the thing. Nowadays, clearing the Grand National fences, you can kick over the first top half of the fence.
Even Tiger Roll did, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's almost better to be a low jumper because you can easily kick over the top of it because it's just stuff laid over a rubber core, isn't it? It's not a big, stiff obstacle like it used to be. So, you know, you don't have to have a grand jumper to win it. Quite the opposite, in fact, to win the Grand National, I think.
Yeah, it's still helps to be able to jump fairly well, but it's not. It doesn't force them to jump as they did in the old days.
What I did think was that the Rossington looks really exciting because if Mr. Coffey, who I thought was brilliant on hurdles debut at Newbury, if he runs in that, then he's taking on Edwardstone, I think, who hasn't raced since early December, but has very good form, having beaten Harry Senior, who has gone on to win well, if that makes sense.
And Fiddler on the Roof, don't forget.
Yeah, indeed. So I mean the Rossington is usually quite a decent race anyway. But I mean, you've got whoever wins that could be going towards Cheltenham as one of the best of the English. You know,
Rossington Main to give it its almost defunct title. It used to be around Doncaster. the Russington Main Novices Hurdle, and now it's the Sky Bet Supreme Hurdle, Supreme Novices Hurdle Trial.
And
these are really difficult races to look at in advance because you end up with what looks like a really good field of a dozen or so horses, or 11 engaged at this stage. You can end up with 3 or 4 of them in the end.
I thought it was interesting Marie's Rock had the entry. A lot of good judges were seriously impressed by her at Taunton.
She's gone a little bit under the radar because she's gone, just an ordinary maiden hurdle first time out, and then a listed hurdle at a minor track. So she's flown a little under the radar, but she's been very impressive. She's impressive first time out, even though she didn't seem to be fancied. Does this
suggest they're going for the if they run her, then are they going to be looking at the
given who owns her, I think they might look at we've had a mare start favourite for the Supreme. Not that many years ago, coming through this race as well, Amaretta Rose, I think, and Marie's Rock. I mean, she's come a long way in a short space of time. She was, as I said, on her hurdles debut at Haydock, she was very easy to back, went off at 4-1 in a small field, but showed a really smart turn of foot to win that. And the form itself is not ordinary. It's decent enough form, but it didn't get to the bottom of her. She was just asked to sit in behind rivals and then come between horses at the last flight. Whereas at Taunton, she showed what she was made of. And when you add her mare's allowance in, she doesn't come far behind the best of the novice hurdlers this season. Certainly based on her BHA rating, she gets a very big rating from the handicapper. And I think if you worked out what the Supreme field was going to look like now and take the £7 off her, she would be not far off top rated.
Good stuff. In the Peter Marsh, hoping to see Definitely Red run in that. He was going very well in the Grand National 3 years ago, in the race that One for Arthur won, when he was squeezed for space or something got in his way and unseated his rider. Now, Bobby Beavers, in his BetConnect blog that he wrote about a month ago, says the plan is very much to go for the Grand National again with Definitely Red, who again showed his liking for the national fences when doing well in the Beecher Chase. I think he became 4th or something in that. So he, even without winning the Peter Marsh, I mean, if he runs well in it, that would be something to look at.
Yeah, I don't think he's well enough handicapped these days to win a race like this. But he's shown his liking for Aintree in the past. He's been a smashing horse since day one. I saw him win a bumper at Cheltenham at one of the winter meetings many moons ago, and he's an absolutely smashing horse. But he's giving a fair bit of weight away here. He's an 11-year-old. There's some up and coming types in there. Champers on Ice, talking about up and coming types, isn't one as a 10-year-old, but he's very lightly raced over fences. Highly regarded when he went chasing in the first place, but didn't really work out. I remember him starting favourite for the Timeform Novices Handicap Chase at Cheltenham 2 or 3 years ago, and then he ran in the National Hunt Chase. He didn't jump particularly well over fences, to be perfectly honest with you, but he looked like if he could sort his jumping out, he would have been all right. He's come right back to form over hurdles this season, and he'll get ground conditions in his favour here. So he's quite an interesting one for his age group. I know Maddy likes one. I'll let you mention that as well, Maddy.
Thanks. I was looking at you then as if to say, don't steal my horse. No. Trained by Sandy Thompson, who, do you know what? I think he's a very underrated trainer in the north. He had a winner, Ali Momo, the other day, a very good horse. I think he was trained by Warren Greatrex. He managed to get him to win again. And he trains Geronimo in this, who was pulled up when he was seen in the Scottish Grand National. He was 12-1 then, so he was quite well fancied. Really progressive before that. He returned with a win at Newcastle. And I just think off a mark of 137, there's the potential there. And he's the sort that could perhaps get a little bit overlooked in the market. So if he turned up, I think definitely room for improvement off that mark.
Smashing pedigree for chasing as well. He's by Catastrophe, who many moons ago started favourite for the Arkle for Robin Dickon. You don't see too many sons of Catastrophe on the race course, but you don't see too many chasers go on to be stallions, to be perfectly honest.
And I can't imagine Robin Dickon has had many favourites for the Cheltenham races.
No, Robin wouldn't have had too many favourites for the Cheltenham Festival. Did ride in the Gold Cup once, did Robin, back in the day, in the early 80s. He rode a no-hoper in that, but at least he was a rider in the Gold Cup at Cheltenham, which is something else.
Great
And he's had
influence,
some decent horses in his day as Robin. But there you go. Catastrofe's going back quite a while. A smashing horse, and most of the sons of Catastrophe have been racing for Robin Dickon, unsurprisingly.
Yeah.
And he's out of a double trigger merger on him also. So he is an interesting one. The return to, I think, ground is crucial to him. It was too quick for him in the Scottish National. He previously won over 3.25 at Ayr on heavy ground. And he would definitely be on my short list for that.
Haydock might not even be on, mightn't it? So
they always somehow manage Haydock.
Yeah.
I'll throw in my selection in the race is going to be Prime Venture, who was my selection in the Welsh National last time out. He justified each way support there and finishing fourth. But if you recall how the Welsh National panned out, they've moved the start back. Because you always used to get trouble on the opening bend, so there's an extra fence in there. They start a bit further up the home straight, so it's less of a rush to the bend. As a result, the race ends up being run slower, and nothing came from off the pace. The front three, I think, were the first three throughout the entire race. The only horse to come from off the back at all was Prime Venture to finish fourth, and I think he actually did well to finish as close as he did, given how that race panned out. Only beaten 4.25 lengths in the end. Got up £1 for that, and I think he's well enough handicapped to win this race.
So what sort of price would you consider value for?
Well,
Prime
again,
Venture?
we should have the prices on it now. I'll see if I can dig that out. He is, as I look at it, second favourite at 7-1. I'm not looking at the firm, just looking at the price summary on Odds Checker. So Acting Lass is the favourite. Acting Lass, obviously a gelding with a name like that. Prime Venture 7-1. Champers and Ice 8-1. Definitely Ready 8-1 and Geronimo 8-1 So we managed to mention the top five.
I was hoping
without knowing what the betting
really
was.
hoping we'd have something at a nice double figure price there. What's about Midnight Tune?
Midnight Tune's next in 10-1 So you're not getting any brownie points by continuing to inch your way down the bet.
Horses,
do you think she's running this as opposed to the Mares Hurdle at Ascot?
I think the Warfield is probably the more likely option.
Yeah, okay.
And there's a few horses who've got entries.
Multiple entries, yeah. One more race I'd like to mention coming up on Saturdays is the race called the New One Hurdle. Is that what it's called?
It is, yeah. It's the old Haydock Champion Hurdle Trial, but now the New One Unibet Hurdle.
So Pentland Hills, who we remember winning the Triumph Hurdles, which is a bit of a surprise actually, then followed up at Aintree, but made a very disappointing seasonal debut when presumably wasn't fit. I mean,
do you think it was disappointing?
Well,
it was.
Something.
He almost certainly ran his best race.
I thought the
thing
story
about
of the race told you that he jumped impeccably. He travelled really well over the last blew up.
Yeah, he looked like he was going to win jumping the last, and then he didn't quite get home. So, and in terms of the form that he showed, that was probably better than he'd shown at Cheltenham and Aintree. You forget how much juveniles have got to improve to mix it with the
that's
with
true.
The best.
Being at that stage of the season, that's a good point. So anyway, he will presumably be expected to win this.
Not sure heavy ground would be his bag.
No, I mean he was placed on heavy ground in the flat, and his final flat start was in heavy. Prior to that, Chris Wall trained him. He raced him almost exclusively in good to firm ground. So he thought the horse was a good ground horse in the flat. He probably ran to his form. He was beaten on heavy, but he ran to form. And obviously he ran on good to soft at Cheltenham. And it was probably good at Aintree when he ran there. But I would be worried about heavy ground. I'd be worried about him in a real slog. You know, I know he won the Triumph over 2 Mile 1. Triumph ended up being a slightly strange race anyway. Aintree probably a better indication.
I thought we spoke about this on the Monday postcast, and Ribble Valley, Nicky Richards has given him an entry in this as a novice, obviously beaten by Master Debonair at Ascot last time. I just get the impression, I think I spoke to the trainer about him after he won a bumper, and I get the impression they think he's fairly useful.
They think he's very good. I spoke to Nicky oddly enough, talking about having been racing. Went to Ascot and saw that race. Spoke to Nicky afterwards, and he said you'll see a completely different horse on better ground. So the problem with that is he's in this. He's also in the Rossington Main, and the ground's going to be heavy. I wonder whether he
just seemed to tank a bit Ascot, didn't he? You don't like a horse to be that enthusiastic
I can see him going for the more battle hurdle at Kelso or something like that. So he'd actually be mixing it with experienced hurdlers there. But it's quite a kind race for a novice to run in. The more battle as a rule. But you'd have to worry about him turning out again on heavy ground, given that Nicky put it forward as an excuse for his defeat at Ascot.
Who would you, looking at the Supreme trial then, who would you sort of come down on if you're not fancying Pentland Hills. I mean, Ballyandy's going to go on the ground. He's been consistent.
I'd be with Ballyandy.
Yeah.
I'll tell you who's interesting in there. It's just interesting that they've actually put him in a champion hurdle trial again as Durasso for Joseph O'Brien.
Indeed, yeah, very.
That's a really
horse.
Interesting entry, because he won the trial, the Red Mills trial at Goran last season, and then went over fences. He'd won twice over fences in France anyway, so he wasn't a novice last season. He won a conditions chase, I think, after that. In fairness, in the Red Mills trial, he took the whole of the trip to get on top. He ended up being impressive in the end, but he didn't look particularly comfortable at the trip. And I think the 2 miles at Haydock was actually marginally short of 2 miles on the tighter track. I wonder whether that would suit him. But it's really interesting. They're clearly thinking, is it worth getting an idea whether he might go for the champion hurdle? That'll be an interesting.
They've entered in. Wasn't he in the Matheson hurdle, and then they took him out as well? They've entered him in a couple of these races, and you sort of think, well, they obviously believe they've got a decent horse on their hands to be testing the waters over this sort.
Well,
of
I mean,
trip.
in terms of what he's achieved, he's not. I was going to say he's not far behind. I think he'd be time form top rated in this race at the weights. I think he would end up coming out top on time form figures based on his Goran run last season. But obviously he's not a dyed in the wool 2 mile hurdler.
No.
So that's the interesting thing. And he's been supported. He's come in the betting since it opened, based on the summary I'm looking here at on Odds Checker. But you wouldn't be certain that he's going to run in the first place. But he's just a very interesting entry in there. But as it stands, if I had to have a bet at the moment, Ballyandy's certainly going to run, isn't he? And he's been running really well this season. Obviously finished in front of Pentland Hills last time out. Again, he stays further than this, but he looked perfectly comfortable in the international hurdle. So at 9-2 compared to the 6-4 by Pentland Hills at this stage, if again, you'd have to put a gun to my head to be punting at this stage, but it would be him.
He says as if it's absolute bonkers. Yeah.
I couldn't help noticing that Cornerstone Lad, the surprise conqueror of Bouverdere, is there, but I mean, he might have had his day in the sun, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, his previous win before he went to the Fighting Fifth looks solid enough form, and it doesn't give him a huge amount to find. And, take Bouverdere out of that, and he's still beating Lady Buttons and Silver Streak. So you either believe that he completely stole that from the front, which to a degree he did get away from them. But the runner-up, Barry Geraghty, always seemed confident that he would get back to him until that mistake at the second last.
Bouverdere was injured,
Yes.
That was not a
no, exactly. But in fairness,
from him.
if you take Cornerstone Lad out of the race and have Bouverdere beaten the other two by the distance that he did, you'd have said he'd run his race. So how much has affected Bouverdere in the end? Obviously, almost certainly enough to stop him winning the race, but not 10 to 12 lengths. So it's a solid enough performance. He's a hard horse to get a handle on because his flat form's very ordinary, and he's exposed in the flat as well. So he's just suddenly come alive as a hurdler, and this will be his real test of whether you can't really see him being a champion hurdle horse, but he could be the kind of horse to win another trial.
Yep. So the next item on my agenda says, discuss the major clues from last weekend. What did we see last weekend? We saw Frodon finally picking up the winning thread again. I thought it showed plenty of heart, and it was always popular when Bryony Frost has a Saturday winner. It does kind of open up the dilemma now about whether they go Gold Cup or try and defend the Ryanair.
I think it's quite simple.
Yeah, I think it's quite simple as well.
You look at that race as well, and you just have to conclude that he's not best going that way round.
Yes.
On the bare bones of it, beating Keeper Hill by as far as he did is not a performance to write home about. But although he's won that Cotswold Chase, and I think the trip was extended that day as well. I'm not sure if they moved the rails out.
Yeah.
But it was further than initially advertised. He just looks a Ryanair horse to me every day of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Cotswold Chase gives you a false idea as well. It was a small field. He beat a thorough stayer on Elegant Escape, who he's got more gears than. And Bryony held on to him for as long as she could. She allowed him to use his jumping as much as he could without going all out in front. And I thought it was a canny ride. And he found enough to hold off Elegant Escape, but he was screaming for the line. He was not flying up the hill, whereas at the festival last year in the Ryanair, he really came up the hill strongly to rally and and repass ASO. So he's got no problem with the hill. The trip is the big worry. And of course, we've seen plenty of horses come up the hill perfectly well in the Cotswold Chase, historically, who don't stay the trip in the Gold Cup. It's a completely different test because of the nature of the races, not just the trip, but also the way the races are run. The Gold Cup is run that much faster, and you can't preserve stamina if you don't stay in the Gold Cup.
I can't remember a slow Gold Cup ever. It always seems to go off.
I've seen one or two. If you try to get a picture of like the third last fence when Cotto Star won his first Gold Cup, almost everything's in a line.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you're going to get a decent pace. And last year's Gold Cup, they didn't go. I don't think they went ridiculously fast in that either. But yeah, Cotto Star's first, because it wasn't soft ground either, so it really played into his hands.
I think with Frodon, the remarkable thing is how much do you add to his racing that's just in sheer bravery and guts, isn't it? I mean, you put him up against any horse and he'll scrap to try and win the race, and that's a very, very valuable attribute to have in a horse. But I think the owner obviously
he wants the emphasis on jumping as well. That's the thing about the Gold Cup is there's so much emphasis on stamina there. That I mean, I'm not suggesting you can get away with bad jumping, but you can't just jump your way around. That drag from the third last fence to the line must feel forever if you're a 2.5 miler who jumps for fun, which is essentially what he is. Whereas the Ryanair, they go that little bit quicker because they are specialist 2.5 mile chasers, and so many good horses get caught out with the jumping test in the Ryanair. They don't have time to sort themselves out. You've got to get in a rhythm straight away, and that really suits him because his jumping is such an asset.
He must be amongst the best jumpers out there, I would have thought.
There'd be few better than him. Obviously, he's jumped left-handed at Kempton, so you can knock him
did
for
that.
that.
Make that little shape,
but in fairness, in terms of
a lot of horses do that though. I know Paul Nicholls has always said that Cotto Star did that.
But Ruby Walsh said the same. You look at where Cotto Star ended up on the course at Kempton. But Ruby just let him sort of drift out because it's natural. He just corrected left. And there's no point fighting them when they do that, because sometimes when you fight them, it ends up exacerbating it. So yeah, it doesn't bother me if a horse is sort of correcting a little bit, as long as they're not putting in an extra stride to do it, and as long as as they're not flying off the bends. So I wouldn't criticise a horse too much for that, as long as they're still being quick at their fences. The one issue with that, of course, is that if Frodon was in a Grade 1 championship race at Kempton, it would be a tactical disadvantage because he'd be allowing horses up as inside at a crucial stage, so it becomes a weakness then. But in terms of I wouldn't call him a bad jumper because of that. And his jumping left-handed is superb. His jumping, they didn't make enough use of him at Wetherby to show his jumping off. And Aintree, obviously, he probably would have needed the run anyway. But the fact that they missed the fences out was just a little bit of a bit of a joke as far as he was concerned.
We saw Kimberlite Candy put in a very encouraging performance. If you're looking for a staying chaser, didn't he on Saturday?
Well, I was going to try to find out how much he'd gone up. I think obviously the weights have been the new handicap marks have come out, obviously. So it'd be interesting to see how much he's gone up. But of course, for the Grand National, it's going to be a very strong national this year in terms of the entries, because of having Tiger Roll in there. So there's more reason for the top class stayers to go for the national this year, because they know that you can't get more weight than Tiger Roll, really, given what he's done. So everything's going to get a racing weight. Kimberlite Candy, even if he does, he's going to go up a fair bit for that, and he has gone up. I just haven't dug it out at the moment. But he's still going to end up with a perfectly fair weight to carry in the Grand National against Tiger Roll. So you'd be positive about him for that. He's gone the same route as One for Arthur as well. One for Arthur caught the eye running on the Beecher before winning this contest. I say this contest, the Classic Chase at Warwick, and then had his next run in the National and won that. Interestingly, he would have been a bit of an exception in
that's quite a long break, isn't it?
That's a very long break by national standards. Most Grand National winners over the years have had a recent run. You'd have thought, given the nature of the National, that getting them there fresh would be a positive. But historically,
February is a good time to have your last prep run, I believe, isn't it? Usually for the National. Okay. So, what else are we thinking? Sort of looking ahead now.
Well, from that race as well, I have to throw in Le Broy as a horse that I really liked for the National before that. He's finished 5th in the end, but the race didn't pan out for him at all, because with the false start, he he didn't miss the break as such, but he ended up being in a bad position when they started from the standing start. Obviously, he was ridden by an inexperienced rider in that race, which is hugely important when you're going to have a standing start, and rather unfair for when you're not the one who's caused the false start to be a disadvantage by the standing start. I'm not a big fan of standing starts, I have to say.
I'd be with you on that one.
Yeah, so he ended up, over the first fence, he was disputing last place, whereas I think they wanted to have him handy. He was lining up in the first place, with the leaders going forward. And he's a horse who wants to use his jumping and wants to go forward. So he ended up in a bad position, and then he never had daylight to do his thing. So he was hampered about 7 times. Only, not massively. The thing about Warwick is it's on the turn an awful lot. The fences come up very quickly down the back straight, and there is scope for horses getting in your way quite a lot at that track, and that's what happened to him. And the fact that he ended up running on for 5th, I thought was a really commendable performance, and it means, of course, he's not going to go up in the handicap. He's guaranteed to get into the national, I would have thought, the National Hunt Chase winner, and he would be my idea of the my number 1 national fancy anti-post.
Le Bray.
Yeah.
Yep. Anything for the national at this stage?
I mean, that's a bit cruel, isn't it? I must admit, I did a couple of months ago. We were asked to do a piece on finding a horse for anti-post, not for Cheltenham, and I had a quick flick through the Grand National, and I thought one horse who was very interesting, who I'm a big fan of, is Talk is Cheap for Alan King. Good ground, be crucial to him. Disappointing, obviously, when we saw him at Sandown behind Santini. But the way he won that Bet365 Gold Cup at Sandown, I just thought he would be made for a race like the Grand National if he were to take to the fences. But again, that's very tentative. It's a long way away. I'm not sure what the plans are with him.
Indeed. Well, I was hoping Rose Dobbins' horse Johnny Sofa might have a go at the Grand National.
He's a lovely horse.
But the trouble with her stable is the horses are cold for sort of 9 months of the year, and then they suddenly have a moment when they run well, but then they go off the boil again. But
he just didn't look like he got home in the race at Wetherby, did he?
No.
The Roland Merrick.
Yeah.
Well, we're moving on. We've discussed plenty. Any sort of final thoughts now for sort of Cheltenham? I mean, I've been looking at this.
You say final thoughts.
Well,
there's very much initial thoughts.
Yeah, but we've been talking for so long. Any thoughts? Any sort of headline thoughts on the markets? Anything that catches your eye? I mean, I've been looking at the markets, and they aren't in a bit of a mess, and yet there isn't a lot of value. I mean,
no, this is the problem. Anti-post betting at the festival has become more and more difficult as time goes by. People want to wait until it's non-run or no bet, but once it is non-run or no bet, then you get ridiculously short prices about everything.
Yeah.
And no one really wants to stand out. It's not a competitive market. Bookmakers are using it just to advertise the fact that it's there rather than trying to take money on it.
Yeah.
And there doesn't tend to be a huge amount of value. And there's so much. You need to be getting standout value at this stage to be getting involved. Because so much can happen.
This? Champagne Super Over, 20-1 for the Champion Bumper. It's the only race he can run in, which helps.
Well, that does help, yes.
He was just. I don't know if you saw it, but
he was very
won
impressive.
A bumper at Ayr by about 16 lengths on debut. So that sort of, I thought I might have a few quid on that.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly wary of very easy debut bumper winners as a rule.
I've backed Notebook for the Arkle. So that would be my
pre-Christmas or post-Christmas?
Yeah, I backed him at 16-1.
Yeah,
very nice.
Absolutely love the horse. I'm not saying necessarily that run at Leopardstown. Lorena obviously didn't run to form. Fakir Duderis maybe wasn't given the optimum ride, but any horse who jumps the way that Notebook jumps, I think is one to have on side. Hopefully we'll see him again at the Dublin Racing Festival, and hopefully he can win again anyway.
I was quite interested in the horse of Mick Shannon's, who ran in the Grade 2 chase at Warwick at the weekend. Hold the Note.
Yes.
But I was absolutely not kicking myself. I was trying to kick Mick Shannon for running him in a Grade 2 chase. He was rated in the mid 130s.
I did think that.
Really well handicated.
Roll again brought him down at Kempton, didn't he? I was travelling at Kempton.
He was travelling well. I napped him at Kempton. He was travelling well when he was almost brought to a standstill and pulled up very quickly by Tom Scudamore. And I thought, this is a horse who will definitely win a decent handicap. And then they've gone into a Grade 2 chase, and he's been very narrowly beaten, trying 3 miles for the first time, which he didn't. I wouldn't say he didn't stay at, but the winner stayed at better than him. And That's
I thought
giving the handicapper a little bit too much.
I thought Watmore was one to look at in future in that race because
Yes.
he was absolutely mullered on the home turn.
Yes.
Maybe he's not a Cheltenham horse, but for those sort of 2.5 mile handicaps, he's not short of a bit of pace, Watmore, and I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I'm with you. Hold the note.
Yeah, and he might by the time if he misses Cheltenham and goes somewhere else, he might be. There's a decent little race at Ayr actually that might suit him.
You did well to mention Hold the Note in your BetConnect blog on the Christmas turkeys, if you remember, which was it was a good spot anyway. Because even if you had backed that horse each way, you would have made a little profit on.
Yeah, it was one of those. I'd rather he was held back for a handicap. I'd have had a decent bet on him in a handicap, but taking on that company and going up in trip was a sort of double whammy that made it difficult to be confident.
Right. Well, look, just a little company message from BetConnect, because we're sort of reading a lot of stuff on Twitter from professional gamblers, people who are very good at spotting value in the markets, and they're being closed down by, traditional bookmakers all the time. And the other thing they have to contend with is premium charges on Betfair. So this is really just a reminder that if you don't have a pro account with BetConnect yet, we can, it's definitely something to look out for. We can help you get lots of early liquidity. We've got other account holders who hold punter accounts already to lay you. And, we've got very low commission as well. So it's just something for you to be aware of. So that's it. Thank you for listening to us. My thanks to Rory and Maddy for joining me. That was the second episode of the BetConnect podcast. Really hope you enjoyed it, and do send us any feedback, positive or negative, via our Twitter account.